The thing about a machine gun is this: it's not just steel and springs and carefully machined parts. It's a covenant. Every time you pull the trigger, you're trusting that covenant with your life. Nathaniel Thorne learned this truth the hard way, starting with a telegram that arrived at his apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts on a Tuesday morning in August 1937. The telegram was brief, 3 lines. An invitation from the British War Office to participate in a technical exchange program at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield Lock, North London. 6 months, all expenses paid. Report by September 15th. Nate was 25 years old. He'd graduated top of his class from MIT with a degree in mechanical engineering. He'd written his thesis on gas-operated firearm mechanisms, focusing specifically on the problem of sustained automatic fire without catastrophic barrel failure. The thesis had gotten attention. Apparently, it had gotten attention across the Atlantic. He almost didn't go. His mother was dying. Cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe 8. She'd made him promise to take the position anyway. Sitting in her hospital room at Massachusetts General, her hand thin as paper in his, she'd said the only thing that mattered. Your father would have wanted this. His father, Staff Sergeant Robert Thorne, Sergeant Robert, killed in action October 1918, exactly 3 weeks before the armistice. The official report said machine gun fire. What the report didn't say was that Robert Thorne had been carrying a Lewis gun when he died, that the Lewis gun had jammed, that he'd been trying to clear the stoppage when German bullets found him. Nate had been 6 years old. He'd spent the next 19 years learning everything there was to know about why guns jam, why they fail, why they break the assurance they're supposed to keep. So he took the position. He sailed from New York on September the 3rd aboard the RMS Aquitania. 5 days later, he stood on the docks at Southampton with a single leather suitcase and a head full of American confidence, ready to show the British how things were really done. The confidence lasted exactly 48 hours. Enfield Lock in 1937 was a fortress of industrial precision. The factory sprawled across 30 acres of North London, surrounded by high brick walls and guarded gates. Inside, the noise was constant, the hammer of drop forges, the scream of cutting lathes, the rhythmic clatter of assembly lines producing rifles that would arm an empire. Nate was assigned to Building 7. Small Arms Development, that's where he met Václav Holek. Holek was 50 years old, Czech by birth, and the finest firearms designer Nate had ever encountered. He was a small man, slight, with wire-rimmed spectacles, and hands that never stopped moving. When he talked about weapons, he talked about them the way other men talked about women, or God, or art. "Mr. Thorne," Holek said on that first morning, his English heavy with Czech accent. "You come from America to teach us, yes?" "I come to collaborate, sir," Holek smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Good. Then I teach you first lesson. Forget everything you think you know." On the workbench between them sat a machine gun. It looked strange to Nate's eyes. The magazine fed from the top instead of the bottom. The barrel could be changed in seconds without tools. The stock was simple, the lines clean, almost elegant. "This is ZB 26, Holek said. "Made in Brno, my city. Czechoslovakia. The British Army, they want to adopt this gun. But first, we must convert it. From 7.92mm Mauser to .303 British. You understand the problem?" Nate understood immediately. The .303 British cartridge used a rimmed case. The rim was necessary for extraction from bolt-action rifles, but in a machine gun magazine, those rims created a nightmare. Stack rimmed cartridges in a straight magazine and they'd catch on each other. Rim lock. The gun would jam before it fired 10 rounds. "You've tried a double-stack magazine?" Nate asked. Yes, still locks.
Single stack? Too narrow, only 15 rounds, not enough. Nate picked up one of the .303 cartridges from the bench, turned it over in his hands. The brass caught the light from the factory windows. The rim is the problem, he said. Yes. So we don't fight the rim, we accommodate it. Holek leaned forward. How? That's when Nate saw it. The solution hiding in plain sight. We curve the magazine. For the first time, Holek's smile was genuine.
They worked together for the next 8 weeks, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, designing, testing, modifying, testing again. The curve had to be precise. Too shallow and the cartridges would still rimlock. Too steep and the spring wouldn't feed reliably. Nate did the calculations, Holek did the prototyping. Together they found the answer, a 30-degree curve, 28 rounds, 0 rimlock failures in 5,000 test rounds. The British Army designated it the Bren gun. BR from Brno, EN from Enfield. Nate called it his redemption, because somewhere in that curved magazine, in those precisely calculated angles, was the ghost of his father. The Lewis gun that had failed him. The vow to do better. This gun would hold true. Winter came to London like a slow bruise. The days shortened. The factory windows frosted over. Nate worked through it all, barely noticing the cold, barely noticing anything except the gun taking shape under his hands. It was Eleanor who made him notice. She appeared one Tuesday evening in December as Nate was leaving the factory. He'd worked late again, the gates were closing, the night watchman was making his rounds. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm terribly sorry, but I seem to have gotten lost." She was wearing a nurse's uniform under a thin coat. Her breath made small clouds in the frozen air. She was shivering. Nate was not good with women. Engineering, yes. Firearms, absolutely. Small talk with beautiful nurses standing alone in the dark outside an arms factory, not his strength. "Where are you trying to go?" he managed. "Royal Hospital. I'm new. Someone told me there was a shortcut through here, but obviously that was wrong." "Obviously?" she smiled. Even in the poor light from the factory lamps, that smile changed everything. Her name was Eleanor Ashford. 26 years old, from a small village in Sussex. She'd come to London 3 weeks earlier to work at the Royal Hospital because that's where they needed nurses. And she needed to feel useful. Her father was a vicar. Her mother had died when she was 12. She had 2 older brothers, both in the Navy. Nate learned all of this while walking her to the hospital, which was not actually that far from Enfield Lock. He learned it because she asked him questions, and he found himself answering about MIT, about his father, about the work he was doing. "So you make guns," she said. "I make them better." Is there such a thing as a better gun? It was a fair question, one Nate had asked himself more times than he could count. "I think," he said carefully, "that as long as men fight wars, someone should make sure the guns work. That seems like the least we owe the men who carry them." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard someone sound hopeful about." They reached the hospital. She thanked him. He stood there like an idiot, not knowing how to ask the question he wanted to ask. She saved him. "I work Tuesday and Thursday evenings, she said. "Late shift. I usually leave around 10. "I could walk you home if you'd like. It's not safe for a woman alone." "No," she agreed. "It's not safe at all." They were married in March 1938. Small ceremony, registry office. Holek was Nate's witness. Eleanor's father came up from Sussex and gave a blessing that was more warning than celebration. "The world is heading somewhere dark," Reverend Ashford said. "Darker than the last war. You two need to hold tight to each other. That's the only way through." He was right about the darkness. Declan was born in December 1938. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, perfect in every way, except the world he'd been born into. Nate held his son for the first time in a London hospital while Adolf Hitler was annexing Czechoslovakia and Holek was receiving telegrams from Brno that made the old man's hands shake. "My family," Holek said one morning at the factory. "They want to leave. But where? Where is safe now?" Nate had no answer. The Bren gun went into full production in September 1937. By the time Declan was born, 30,000 had been manufactured. By the time he was 6 months old, war was no longer a question, it was a countdown. The countdown ended on September 3rd, 1939. Britain declared war on Germany. Nate was working late that night. Eleanor was home with Declan. He heard the news on the factory radio. The announcer's voice was steady, almost calm, reading out the declaration like it was a weather report. Holek was still in the workshop, even though everyone else had gone home or to the pubs to drink away the fear. "It has started," the old man said. "Yes. Czechoslovakia is gone. Poland will be next, then France, then here. The French have the Maginot Line." Holek laughed. It was a bitter sound. "The Germans will go around it. They always find the way around." He picked up one of the completed Bren guns from the rack. One of the first production models marked 00137. He'd been the one to test it. "This gun," he said, "it will kill many Germans, I hope, I pray." He handed it to Nate. "You should learn to shoot it, really shoot it, not just test fire, you should know what it does." The next 8 months were a strange kind of limbo. The phony war, they called it. Britain and France had declared war, but nothing seemed to be happening. The factory kept producing Brens. Nate kept refining small improvements. Eleanor kept working at the hospital. Declan learned to walk, then to run, then to say "da" and point at Nate whenever he came home. Life continued with the weight of waiting pressing down on everything. The waiting ended in May 1940. Germany invaded France and the Low Countries. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The newsreels showed tanks and dive bombers and French roads clogged with refugees. The British Expeditionary Force, which had been sitting in France for 8 months, suddenly found itself cut off, surrounded, pushed back toward the coast, toward a little French town called Dunkirk. Nate made his decision on May 24th. He was at home. Eleanor was putting Declan to bed. The radio was playing music, but every hour they interrupted for war bulletins. The news was getting worse. The BEF was trapped. The German pincers were closing. All those men, all those Brens he'd helped design, all those covenants about to be tested. "I'm going to volunteer," Nate said. Eleanor stood in the doorway of Declan's room. Their son was asleep behind her. She didn't look surprised. "America isn't in the war. I can volunteer for the British Army. They're taking anyone who can hold a rifle." "You're an engineer, not a soldier." "My father was a soldier. I think it's genetic." She crossed the room, put her hands on his face. "Your father died being a soldier." "I know. You have a son." "I know that too." She kissed him, hard, desperate. "Then you'd better come back." The British Army didn't ask many questions. "American volunteer? Can you shoot? Report to the depot at Canterbury. You're with the 2nd Battalion, Coldstream Guards." Nate had never fired a rifle in combat, had never worn a uniform, had never taken orders from a sergeant who could barely read but could strip and reassemble a Bren gun blindfolded in under 40 seconds. He learned fast. They gave him 3 weeks of accelerated training. Barely enough time to learn how to march in formation, how to dig a proper foxhole, how to fix a bayonet. They gave him a uniform that didn't quite fit, and boots that definitely didn't fit, and a Bren gun. Number 00137. The same one Holek had handed him 9 months earlier, the same gun he'd test, fired 1,000 times. Now it was his to carry into France. They crossed the channel on May 28th. The sky was full of German planes, Stukas. The dive bombers came down screaming, their sirens designed to terrify, and it worked. Nate spent the crossing in the hold of a destroyer, surrounded by men who'd already been fighting, men who had that 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing too much death too fast. They landed at Dunkirk just as the evacuation was beginning. The beaches were chaos, hundreds of thousands of men, British and French, forming long lines that stretched into the surf, waiting for ships that couldn't come fast enough. Overhead, the Luftwaffe circled like sharks. Nate's unit was assigned to hold the perimeter, keep the Germans back long enough for the evacuation to continue. He carried the Bren. 22 pounds of steel and certainty. The fighting was nothing like training. Training had targets that didn't shoot back. Training had breaks for meals and water. Training had rules. This had none of that. This had German artillery falling in patterns that walked up the beach. This had machine gun fire from positions you couldn't see. This had watching men die in ways that would stay with you forever. Nate set up the Bren behind a low wall that had once been part of someone's garden. His assistant gunner was a kid from Liverpool named Harry, who kept talking to fill the silence. "First time?" Harry asked. "Yes." "Me too. Well, first time with real Jerrys. We'll be fine." "That Bren's a good gun." "I know. I helped design it." Harry stared at him. "You're having me on." "No." "Bloody hell, don't tell the other lads. They'll either think you're a hero or blame you if it jams." The Bren did not jam. For 3 days, Nate fired that gun at targets he could barely see. He changed barrels when they got too hot to touch, even with gloves. He went through magazine after magazine. The curved magazine he'd designed, the mechanism he'd perfected, it functioned exactly as intended. On the 3rd day, June 1st, orders came to pull back. The last ships were leaving. Everyone who wasn't already on the beach needed to get there now. They ran. Nate carried the Bren. 22 pounds felt like 50 after 3 days of no sleep and little food. Behind them, German artillery was getting closer. The perimeter was collapsing. They reached the beach just as a Stuka came down in a screaming dive. The bomb hit 30 yards away. The blast picked Nate up and threw him like a child's toy. He hit the sand hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. His ears rang, blood in his mouth, vision blurred. When he could focus again, he was lying in the surf. Small waves were washing over him. The Bren was gone. He searched frantically. The beach, the water, nothing. Number 00137. His weapon. The first one. Lost. Harry pulled him to his feet. "Leave it, we have to go." They waded into the water toward a fishing boat that was taking on men. The water was cold, oil slicked, bodies floated face down. Nate climbed aboard the boat, turned back to look at the beach. Somewhere in that hell, his gun was lying in the sand or sinking into the channel. A German soldier might find it, use it. That thought hurt worse than the concussion. The boat made it to a destroyer. The destroyer made it to Dover. By June 4th, the evacuation was over. 338,000 men saved. But 30,000 Brens lost. Nate returned to London on June 5th. He'd been gone 10 days. It felt like 10 years. He went straight to the flat he shared with Eleanor and Declan. The building was still standing. That was something. Half the street was rubble from a bombing raid, but his building had survived. He climbed the stairs, fumbled with his keys, opened the door. The flat was quiet. Eleanor was putting Declan to bed, her movements careful, deliberate. She'd lost weight, dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, listening for bombers. "You're back," she said. Relief and fear in equal measure. "I'm back." For how long? He didn't have an answer. 2 weeks later, Eleanor made her decision. Declan needed safety. Sussex, her father's house, away from the bombs. But Eleanor stayed. The hospital needed nurses desperately. The factory had set up a first aid station in Building 7, and volunteers were scarce. "I'll come down weekends," she told Declan, kissing his forehead. "Be good for grandfather." That was mid-August. By September, the Blitz had begun. Nate tried to convince her to leave every night, every morning, every stolen moment between shifts. "The bombing is getting worse, which is why they need nurses. Declan needs his mother. Declan needs a world without Nazis. This is how I fight." He couldn't argue with that. He'd made the same choice at Dunkirk. On September the 7th, Nate was on the factory floor reviewing production schedules when the sirens went off. Another raid. They'd had 3 that week already. The workers headed for the shelters. Nate stayed. Someone had to secure the machinery. The bombs fell at 8:47 p.m. Building 7 took a direct hit. The explosion was massive. Nate was thrown across the factory floor. When he came to, the workshop where he'd spent 2 years perfecting the Bren was a crater 30 feet across. He ran toward the wreckage. Other workers were already there, digging, shouting names. Eleanor's name was among them. She'd been in the first aid station, Building 7, Ground Zero. They found her body 3 hours later, buried under brick and twisted metal. She'd died instantly. That's what they told him. Instant, no pain. It didn't help. Nate sat in the rubble holding her hand. Cold. Already cold. Declan was safe in Sussex. Didn't know yet that his mother would never come home. Holek found him there at dawn. "I am sorry, my friend," the old Czech said quietly. "Sorrier than words can say." Nate couldn't speak, couldn't think. The ringing in his ears from the blast mixed with the ringing from Dunkirk. "The factory will rebuild," Holek continued. "The production must continue. Britain needs these guns, needs them desperately now." "I can't." "You must. I lost my wife. I lost my gun on that beach. I lost everything." Holek's grip tightened on his shoulder. "No, you lost a battle. The war continues. Your son needs his father. Britain needs its guns. And I need you, Nathaniel. I am an old man. I cannot rebuild this alone." Nate looked at the crater, at the twisted metal and broken brick, at the space where everything he'd built had been. "The Germans will come after us again," he said. "Yes. They'll bomb this factory until there's nothing left. Probably. And we'll rebuild again." "Yes." Nate stood up. His legs were steadier now, not by much, but enough. "Then let's get to work." That night, Nate went to Sussex, held his son for the first time in 2 months. Declan was 21 months old, too young to understand that his mother was never coming home. Old enough to know his father was different now, broken. Reverend Ashford offered comfort, Bible verses, tea, the things vicars offer. Nate accepted none of it. He held Declan, whispered commitments in the dark about coming back, about keeping him safe, about making sure the guns worked so other fathers wouldn't die on beaches far from home. Different words than his father probably said. Same intention, but this time would be different. This time, Nate would make certain. Rebuilding anything after destruction teaches you what matters. The ornamental falls away, only the essential remains. Nate Thorne learned this clearing rubble from Building 7 in October 1940. Each brick removed, each body found, each day another choice between going home to America or staying to finish what he'd started. There was never really a choice. Declan stayed with Reverend Ashford in Sussex, 2 years old, safe. Nate visited monthly, awkward hours trying to connect with a child who barely knew him. A child who'd ask, "Where's Mama?" and Nate would have no words. The work was easier. The work made sense. By December, one production line ran. 30 Brens weekly, not enough. Never enough. The Army needed 30,000 to replace Dunkirk losses. The RAF needed guns for aircraft defense. The Home Guard needed them for invasion preparation. Everyone needed Brens, and only Enfield could deliver, which meant the Luftwaffe kept coming. January brought incendiaries. The factory burned 3 days. Nate fought fires with buckets and desperation, saved 2 production lines, lost one, started over. Holek worked beside him through everything. The old Czech had aged terribly, hands shaking from exhaustion, letters from Prague arriving censored, the gaps between lines screaming what couldn't be written. "They will come for me eventually," Holek said one February night on the factory floor. "The Gestapo knows what I designed, knows how many Germans it kills. They want revenge." "You're in England, you're safe." Holek's smile was bitter. "No one is safe anymore." The warning came in March 1941. 2 intelligence officers, civilian clothes, that look that said they already knew your secrets. "German Abwehr has identified you as priority target, Mr. Thorne. They've intercepted communications, your collaboration with Holek, your technical knowledge. If captured, they'll extract everything, then parade you as proof America shouldn't support Britain." "So what are you suggesting?" "Transfer. Canada. John Inglis Company in Toronto needs someone who understands the gun completely. Get production running, out of bomber range." Nate thought about Declan, growing up without parents. "When?" 2 weeks. Convoy from Liverpool." The argument with Holek lasted 3 days. In the workshop, the canteen, walking the midnight factory floor. "You are abandoning me," Holek said, "following orders. You are choosing safety over duty. I'm going where I can produce more guns." But Holek was right. This felt like desertion. Their last night, they assembled one final Bren together. The old ritual, hands moving in practiced synchronization, even as Holek's trembled. "In Brno, before all this, I made hunting rifles," Holek said quietly. "Beautiful custom work. I was happy. Now I make instruments of death and call it patriotism. You make instruments that protect. Perhaps I just help men kill each other more efficiently." He held up the completed receiver. "This is my legacy now, this factory, these guns, all I have left." They shook hands, 2 engineers, 2 exiles, 2 men building meaning from steel. "Come back when it's over," Holek said. "We'll drink to victory." Nate never saw him alive again. The Atlantic crossing took 11 days. Convoy HX-121, U-boats sank 3 ships. Nate's made it. Canada was a different planet. No bombs, no rationing. Just space and factories, and people who thought war was elsewhere. John Inglis Company sprawled across Toronto. Factory manager Douglas Fraser met him at the gates, already talking. "Thank God you're here. 3 months behind schedule. British cabling for more guns. 2,000 workers who've never seen a machine gun. I'm drowning." What Nate found made him understand Fraser's panic. The Canadians had machinery, materials, workers. What they lacked was comprehension. They built washing machines the same way they tried building Brens, without understanding that tolerances mattered, that a gas port 2,000ths too large meant catastrophic failure, that men would die from imprecision. Nate spent April teaching, not manufacturing, teaching. "This curve, he told shift supervisors holding the magazine. "Looks wrong, is essential, prevents rim lock. Without it, the gun jams. With it, soldiers come home." He made them practice until assembly became instinct. By June, 500 guns weekly. August, 1,000. December, 2,000. The numbers climbed. Nate worked, lived in a boarding house, walked to the factory before dawn, walked home after midnight, ate without tasting, slept without dreaming. Monthly letters to Sussex asked about Declan, got back reports of a boy growing, healthy, asking about his father. Nate sent money, toys, couldn't send himself, the work was too important. That's what he told himself. The telegram arrived June 1943. Urgent call from England. The connection crackled with static and distance. A War Ministry colonel whose name disappeared into interference. Mr. Thorne. Difficult news. Václav Holek. He's dead. The factory noise vanished. Everything vanished except that word. How? Gestapo arrested him March. Taken to Theresienstadt concentration camp in Czechoslovakia, died there 2 weeks ago, 3 months. Holek had been in Nazi hands 3 months. Why wasn't I informed? Security protocols. We couldn't risk compromising intelligence sources. We attempted negotiation. Germans refused. They knew his value. The line went dead. Nate sat in Fraser's borrowed office, not moving, not thinking. Holek was dead, tortured, murdered because he'd designed a gun that killed Nazis, and Nazis wanted revenge. Fraser appeared. Bad news? The worst. Take time, take whatever you need. But Nate took nothing. Returned to the production line, checked quality, approved shipments, worked until exhaustion silenced thought, then walked to Lake Ontario, stood watching water. Somewhere across that water, Holek lay in an unmarked grave. A man who'd wanted only to make beautiful hunting rifles, murdered for being too skilled. Nate made his decision standing there. He was going back, not to factories. To war itself, the War Ministry said no, too valuable in production. Stay in Canada, stay safe, that word again. Nate pulled strings, used his American citizenship, finally convinced someone at US Army liaison to listen. I designed the Bren, used it at Dunkirk. The invasion's coming. You need men who understand weapons in combat. Let me go. They let him go. December 1943, back in England, not as engineer, as liaison officer with British commando units training for invasion. 32 years old, too old for frontline infantry by normal standards. These weren't normal standards. Training was brutal. 20-mile marches, beach assaults, close-quarters combat, amphibious drills in freezing water. Nate barely kept up. Younger men thought him insane. American engineer volunteering for the invasion everyone knew would be slaughter. What they didn't understand. Nate needed this. Needed to use what he'd created, needed to be there when it mattered most, needed to make Holek's death mean something. They issued him a Bren in May 1944, serial number 138-CA-44. Made in Canada under his supervision, he'd probably inspected this exact gun. Now it was his to carry into France. Full circle. D-Day came June 6th, H-hour 0630. Omaha Beach. Second wave. First wave already shredded. The beach a kill zone. German machine guns in concrete bunkers. Mortars. Artillery. Bodies everywhere. Nate's landing craft hit a sandbar 50 yards out. Ramp dropped. Machine gun fire immediately killed the first 3 men. Out! Everybody out! He over the side into chest-deep water. Heavy with gear, he waded forward through red water. Men screaming, dying, hit the beach, dove behind steel obstacles, bullets sparked metal. The Bren was wet, sand in the mechanism, every nightmare scenario. He pulled the cocking handle, let it slam forward, turned the gas regulator to maximum for fouled conditions, aimed at a bunker aperture, pulled the trigger. The gun fired, 5-round burst, exactly as designed. The curved magazine fed perfectly. It worked. God help him, it worked. Nate fought across that beach. The gun never jammed, not once. By nightfall, they'd pushed inland, 50% casualties, but they'd made it. The Bren had kept its promise. Normandy fighting lasted 6 weeks. Brutal hedgerow combat, every field a battlefield. Late July near Saint-Lô, clearing a village, house to house, Nate's section on point through a courtyard. The grenade landed at his feet. 1 second to react. He dove backward. The explosion. When he woke, he was on his back, ears ringing, vision blurred. The Bren gone, most of his section dead. German voices shouting. Hands grabbed him, dragged him, zip-tied his wrists. Nate Thorne, designer of the weapon killing Germans by thousands, was now a prisoner. The interrogation room was farmhouse basement. Concrete. 1 bulb, table, 2 chairs. Major Klaus Reinhardt sat across from him. Mid-40s, Wehrmacht, not SS. That mattered. Nathaniel Thorne, American, MIT graduate, designer of the Bren. You've killed many Germans with your invention. Nate said nothing. We could shoot you as illegal combatant, American in British uniform, no trial, just a wall. Silence. Reinhardt lit a cigarette. Offered one. Nate took it. First tobacco in days. But that wastes valuable knowledge, technical specifications, production methods. You will share this? No, we have methods. I'm sure you do. Reinhardt smiled sadly. Your gun is excellent, Mr. Thorne. Better than our MG-34 for precision. We use captured Brens when available. We even have a designation, Leichtes Maschinengewehr 138. Then you should have designed your own. Perhaps, but we designed tanks, rockets, jets. Each side has strengths. 2 days of professional interrogation. No torture, just pressure, mind games. Nate gave nothing. 3rd day, different guards came, younger, nervous. The war was turning. They moved him to a barn with 24 other POWs, British, Canadian, 1 American pilot. Guards spread thin. August 1944. Allies pushing east, Germans collapsing. August 19th, the guards vanished, just left. Prisoners waited until dark. Broke out. No resistance. Found American lines 2 days later. But before they left that barn, Nate found something. In the guard post, leaning against the wall, a Bren gun, serial number 00137, his gun, from Dunkirk, the one he'd lost on the beach 4 years ago. The Germans had kept it, used it, maintained it. It still worked. Nate carried it out. Carried it back to Allied lines. When the debrief officer tried to confiscate it, Nate refused. This gun has been in 3 armies. It's coming home with me. They let him keep it. VE Day came May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe. Nate was in London. The city erupted in celebration. He went to Enfield Lock. The factory still running, still producing. But Holek's workshop was dark, empty. Nate stood there holding serial number 00137, thinking about promises made and promises kept, about the cost of making things that kill, about the old Czech who'd taught him everything. He went to Sussex the next day to see Declan. His son was 6 years old, didn't recognize the man in the doorway. "This is your father," Reverend Ashford said gently. Declan stared, then ran to his room. That night Nate tried to talk to him, failed. The distance was too great. 6 years, a war, a dead mother, a father who'd chosen duty over family. "Give him time," the Reverend said. "Children forgive, eventually." Eventually took 40 years, but standing there that night, holding the gun that had survived everything, Nate understood something. He'd kept his promise to the weapon. Now he had to learn how to keep promises to his son. The healing came in small steps, painful steps. Nate moved back to England permanently in 1946. Got a job at the Ministry of Defence as a civilian weapons consultant, rented a small house in London, tried to be a father to a boy who barely knew him. Weekends with Declan were awkward. Silent dinners, forced conversations, a chasm neither knew how to cross. But Nate kept trying. He showed up every weekend, every holiday, every birthday, even when Declan made it clear he didn't want him there. Korea came in June 1950. Another war, another call, the US. Army Ordnance Corps wanted Nate in Korea, teaching South Korean forces about the weapons they'd been given, including Brens. The British had sent thousands. The Koreans didn't know how to maintain them in brutal conditions. Declan was 12 by then, old enough to understand, old enough to be angry. "You're leaving again? It's only 6 months. That's what you said last time. Korea is different." "How? How is it different from choosing war over me? Again?" Nate had no good answer. He went anyway. Korea in winter was a different kind of hell, not the chaos of Normandy. Something colder, more patient, more cruel. Nate stood on a frozen ridge near the Chosin Reservoir in December 1950, watching Republic of Korea Army soldiers clean their Brens with hands so cold they could barely feel the metal. "The gas regulator," he said through an interpreter. "When it's this cold, you need maximum gas flow, otherwise the action won't cycle." The young Korean lieutenant nodded, adjusted the setting. Test fired. The gun worked. That night, Chinese forces attacked in waves. Thousands of them. The sound was unlike anything Nate had heard before. Bugles, whistles, screaming. The Brens fired through it all, in temperatures 40 below zero, when American M1 Garands were freezing solid. When mortars wouldn't fire, the Brens worked. Because Nate had designed them to work anywhere. Back in his tent that night, unable to sleep, Nate wrote a letter. The first honest thing he'd written to his son. "Declan, I've spent my whole life making things for war. I thought that was enough. I thought if the guns worked, I'd done my job. But watching these men tonight, I realized something. The gun working isn't enough. The man carrying it needs to know someone cares if he comes home. I failed you in that. I'm sorry. I hope someday you'll let me try again. Your father." He folded the letter, put it in his pocket, never sent it. Found it 3 months later, still folded, still unsent. But he kept it. Nate came home from Korea in 1953. The war ended. 50,000 Americans dead. The peninsula divided. Nothing resolved. He returned to England. Tried again with Declan. The boy was 15 now. Not a boy anymore, tall, angry, full of questions that had no good answers. "Why did you leave?" The war was over in 1945. You left again in 1950. Korea needed... I needed a father. I got letters.
What could Nate say? That he didn't know how to be a father? That the work was easier than love? That every time he looked at Declan, he saw Eleanor and it hurt too much? None of those were good enough, so he said nothing. Declan joined the Royal Marines in 1960, 22 years old. Did it specifically to spite his father, to prove he could be a soldier without needing Nate's approval or advice. The irony wasn't lost on either of them.
But something shifted when Declan came home on leave after basic training. He found Nate in the garage of the small house in London, found him cleaning a Bren, an old one of the originals from 1937, number 00138. "Where did you get that?" "Bought it from a collector, wanted to see if I remembered." Declan picked up the barrel assembly, turned it over. The metal was worn but still functional. "Show me." So Nate showed him how to field strip, how to clean, how to check headspace, how to adjust the gas regulator. The same things Holek had shown him 25 years earlier. They worked in silence, hands moving in practiced rhythm, father and son, sharing the only language they both spoke fluently. Engineering. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. The years passed. Declan rose through the ranks, made lieutenant, then captain, then major. He served in Malaya, Cyprus, Northern Ireland, places where the Bren was still standard issue. He wrote to Nate occasionally. Formal letters, professional updates, nothing personal. But he wrote, and Nate wrote back. In 1985, Declan married a nurse named Catherine. The symmetry wasn't lost on Nate. He attended the wedding, said little, watched his son marry a woman who looked nothing like Eleanor but had the same kindness in her eyes. Their son was born in 1987. They named him Owen Robert Thorne, the middle name for Nate's father, the circle completing itself. Nate held his grandson for the first time in a London hospital. The same hospital where Declan had been born 49 years earlier. The same feeling of terror and wonder. "Don't make my mistakes," Declan said quietly. "I made different ones," Nate replied. "That's all anyone can do." Owen grew up hearing stories about the gun, about Dunkirk, about Normandy, about a great-great-grandfather who died when his weapon failed, and a great-grandfather who spent his life making sure that wouldn't happen again. When Owen joined the US Marine Corps in 2009, no one was surprised. Declan called Nate with the news. "Your grandson is going to war." "Afghanistan?" "Probably. He ships out for training next month." Silence on the line. Then Nate spoke. "Tell him to write to me. I want to hear from him."
Why? So you can ignore him like you ignored me? No, so I can do better this time. More silence. "I'll tell him," Declan said finally, and hung up. Owen did write. Long emails from boot camp, from advanced training, from deployment. He asked questions about weapons, about engineering, about fear. Nate answered every one, honestly, without the distance he'd kept with Declan. Better late than never. The call came on April 2nd, 1982. Nate was 70, retired, living quietly.
Seeing Declan maybe twice a year. Civil, respectful, not close, but not enemies anymore. The voice on the phone was military, clipped, urgent. "Mr. Thorne, this is the Ministry of Defense. Your son, Major Declan Thorne, has been wounded in action in the Falkland Islands. He's stable, being evacuated to the hospital ship. We thought you'd want to know." Nate was on a plane to Ascension Island 12 hours later, then a military transport to the South Atlantic, then a helicopter to HMS Uganda, the hospital ship. Declan was in a bed near the stern, shrapnel wounds, left leg, left arm, concussion, alive. He looked up when Nate entered. Surprise flickered across his face, then something else, something that might have been relief. "Dad?" "Son?" Nate sat beside the bed, took in the bandages, the monitors, the pallor. "They said you used a Bren." Declan smiled, weak, pained, but real. "L4 variant, 7.62 NATO, your design, modified for the new cartridge. The gun that saved my platoon at Goose Green was marked L4-6137. Did it work?" "We were pinned down. Argentine machine gun position had us zeroed. I flanked left with the Bren, 300 yards, suppressive fire, gave my men time to assault. We took the position. I took shrapnel from a mortar on the way back, but we held." Nate felt something crack in his chest, something that had been frozen for 42 years. "Your mother would be proud."
Would she? Yes, you're braver than I ever was. You designed the gun, I just fired it. No, you led men, saved lives. I hid in factories and told myself it mattered. Declan reached out with his good hand. Nate took it. "It did matter," Declan said quietly. "The gun you made saved my life today. Probably saved lives at Dunkirk, Korea. 100 other places. That's not hiding. That's that's legacy. They sat like that, holding hands, father and son.
while the hospital ship rocked gently in the South Atlantic swell. "I'm sorry," Nate said, "for all of it. For choosing work over you, for leaving, for not knowing how to be what you needed. I'm sorry too, for being angry, for not understanding until I had to lead men into combat myself. The gun I made saved you," Nate said. "We're even now. We were always even, Dad. I just didn't know it." The healing that started in a garage with an old Bren finished in a hospital ship off the Falklands. Better late than never. Declan recovered, returned to service, retired in 1995 as a colonel. He and Catherine bought a house in Sussex, near where he'd grown up, near where Eleanor was buried. Nate visited often, real visits, not duty, relationship. He watched Owen grow, guided him when asked, stayed silent when not, learned, finally, how to be a grandfather. The letter arrived in January 2012, official, Indian government seal, formal language requesting the honour of Mr. Nathaniel Thorne's presence at a ceremony at Ishapore Arsenal. The final Bren gun was being manufactured. After 75 years of continuous production, they wanted the man who'd helped design it to witness the end. Nate was 100 years old, frail, half-blind, but his mind was sharp. Declan drove him to the airport, 74 years old himself, retired, grey-haired. "You don't have to go, Dad. It's a long flight." "I have to." "Why?" "Because I made a commitment to Holek, to see it through. He's been dead 70 years. Some promises don't expire." The ceremony was February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony of ending production of an instrument of death on a day celebrating love wasn't lost on anyone. The Ishapore Arsenal was massive. Had been producing Brens since 1942, 70 years, outlasted the British Raj, outlasted the British Empire, outlasted almost everyone who'd designed it. Nate stood on the factory floor, surrounded by Indian dignitaries, press, workers. Owen stood beside him. 25 years old, Marine lieutenant, just back from Afghanistan. The final gun moved down the assembly line, each station adding a component, building slowly toward completion. They'd engraved the marking specially. 1B-NT-75, the Indian designation, Nate's initials, and 75 years of service. Nate watched the barrel being fitted, the curved magazine being tested, the gas regulator being calibrated, all the details he'd perfected in 1937. Still relevant, still necessary, still working. The gun reached the end of the line. Final inspection, function check. Perfect. They presented it to Nate. He could barely hold it. Owen had to support the weight. The factory manager gave a speech, thanked Nate, thanked Holek's memory, thanked the workers, thanked the weapon itself for 75 years of faithful service. Then they asked Nate if he wanted to say anything. He looked at the gun in his grandson's hands, at the workers who'd spent their lives building them, at the timeline stretching back to 1937. Eleanor, Holek, Dunkirk, Normandy, Korea, Falklands, Declan, Owen. 75 years. "I made this to save lives," he said finally. His voice was weak but clear. "My father died because his weapon failed."
I wanted to make something that wouldn't fail, something that would bring men home. I don't know if I succeeded. I know it killed. I know it destroyed. But I also know it protected. I know men trusted it. I know it kept faith with them. He paused, gathered strength. "Mr. Holek and I designed this gun to endure wars. It endured us instead. That's acceptable, that's good. because it means we built something real, something that mattered, not just a weapon, an assurance made in steel.
They gave him a standing ovation. Nate didn't hear it. He was looking at Owen, seeing himself, seeing the cycle continue, hoping Owen would never need to use what Nate had made, knowing he probably would. The week after Ishapur, Nate's strength began failing. Not suddenly, just fading, like a battery running down after a century of use. Declan came every day, sat beside the hospital bed. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat. On March the 5th, Nate woke from a nap to find both Declan and Owen there. 3 generations. "I need to tell you something," Nate said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Both of you." They leaned in. "I spent 75 years keeping an oath to a dead man, to my father, to Holek, to Eleanor. I made a gun that wouldn't fail, and it didn't. But I failed anyway. Dad, let me finish. I failed because I thought the work was enough.
I thought if I built something good, something that lasted, that would be my legacy, but you're my legacy, you two. And I almost lost that because I was too busy keeping vows to ghosts." Declan's hand found his father's. "You didn't lose it. We're here." "I know, and that's the only thing I got right," Owen spoke. "Great-great-grandfather Robert. Did he know about you, about what you'd become?" Nate smiled. "No, he died when I was 6. But I'd like to think he'd be proud, not of the gun."
Of this, of you. He closed his eyes. The gun held true for 75 years. I held true for 75 years and 3 weeks. That's acceptable. Those were the last words Nathaniel Thorne spoke. Nathaniel Thorne died in his sleep on March 6, 2012. 3 weeks after the Ishapur ceremony, 100 years and 3 months old, he was buried in Sussex, next to Eleanor, the grave he'd bought 72 years earlier. Declan spoke at the funeral. So did Owen. So did representatives from the British Ministry of Defence and the Indian military. They talked about service, sacrifice, legacy. What they didn't say, because words couldn't capture it, was simpler. Nate had made a commitment to his father, to Eleanor, to Holek, to every man who'd ever carried a Bren into battle. The commitment was this: the gun will work when you need it most. For 75 years, across 4 continents through 6 wars, it did. And that commitment survived everything else. The Bren gun served from 1937 to 2012. 75 years. Nathaniel Thorne served from 1937 to 2012. 75 years. Both kept faith until the very end. Owen Thorne carried his great-grandfather's ashes to Enfield Lock, to the spot where Building 7 once stood, where Nate and Holek had perfected the curved magazine, where Eleanor had died in the Blitz. He scattered them there, on English soil, where it all began. The factory was gone now, condos and shopping centres, but Owen stood there anyway, in his marine dress blues, holding the final Bren, the one marked 1B-NT-75. "Mission complete, sir," he said to the wind, to the ghosts, to the legacy. Then he went home. The gun stayed in the family, passed down, generation to generation, a reminder, not of war, not of death, of the men who build things that last, of fathers and sons, of promises kept, of steel that never breaks faith.